"You step aside," said the medic, and everything felt heavier than the air itself. West Virginia, July 1944. The morning sun had barely risen over the gray rooftops of the prisoner camp, and the dust clung to the wooden floors like a second skin. Lena Fisher shuffled forward, her legs trembling under the thin cotton of her uniform, eyes fixed on the cracked linoleum, as if the floor might swallow her whole. Her hands, pale and veined, clutched the edges of the scale platform, the metal cold against her palms. The barracks were quiet except for the faint creak of the door swinging shut behind the line of women ahead of her, all of them standing rigid, waiting. Outside, the heat pressed in through the wire mesh windows, bending the sunlight into golden shafts that glinted on the scattered tools and wooden benches. The other prisoners watched, their breath shallow, faces drawn, each step forward seeming to stretch time. Then John Carter stepped in, the medic assigned to their care, tall, steady, boots scuffing softly against the floor. His eyes scanned the line of women, lingering on Lena with quiet attention, noting the sharp angles of her jaw, the hollowness under her collarbones, the way her chest rose and fell with laboring breaths. He nodded once to himself, adjusted the tray of rations on the counter, and motioned for her to approach. Lena's heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears as she climbed onto the scale, the thin fabric of her shoes pressing against the cold platform. Numbers ticked up slowly on the dial, and then stopped. 72 pounds. 72. The scale didn't lie, and neither did the hollow ache that seemed to wind through her stomach. The other women exhaled in unison, a low sound that could have been mistaken for relief, but was really recognition of a shared fragility. John's hands moved to the clipboard, jotting notes without a word. Then he looked back up at Lena. His face was calm, professional, but his eyes carried a quiet gravity. "Step aside," he said again, and she obeyed, feeling the weight of the command not as authority but as acknowledgement, as if someone truly saw her. She stepped down slowly, knees trembling, and he guided her to a nearby chair, offering a bottle of water. The liquid was cool and sharp against her parched throat, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of trust. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wood polish, the morning light casting long shadows across the walls. John moved to check the next prisoner, his movements precise, careful, ensuring that each woman's dignity remained intact. Lena watched him, absorbing the rhythm of his gestures, the steady calm he brought into a room that had known only fear. Outside, the wind stirred the dry leaves, a whispering reminder of the world beyond these walls, a world where kindness could exist even amidst chaos. She felt the pulse of life return slowly to her veins, the recognition that survival was not merely enduring, but that someone else could choose to see her as human. Each breath was deliberate, each sip of water a small ceremony, and as John adjusted the straps of the chair, Lena understood, without words, that this small act, a voice that didn't shout, a hand that didn't push, was reshaping the way she saw herself, and perhaps, how the world might see her too. The morning stretched on with a slow insistence, the sunlight spilling across the barracks floor, highlighting the fine dust that floated like tiny motes suspended in amber air. Lena Fisher remained seated, her fingers loosely curled around the bottle of water, tracing the condensation that formed and ran down its smooth surface. The faint hum of distant activity outside the barred windows reached her ears, boots on gravel, a low murmur of voices, the occasional clatter of equipment being carried. She felt the weight of the room pressing in, yet within it, a strange calm had begun to settle. John Carter moved deliberately, checking his clipboard, but his eyes flicked to her and the others repeatedly, scanning for any sign of distress, for subtle shifts in posture or pallor. Each movement he made was precise, measured, and carried with it a quiet assurance that seemed to seep into the room, into the women who had grown accustomed to uncertainty and caution. Lena's gaze wandered briefly to the window, the bright summer light spilling through, illuminating the creases of the barracks walls, the worn floorboards, the small details that suddenly seemed alive. A spider weaving its silk in a corner, a frayed curtain twisting in a slight breeze. She could hear the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, each second a soft metronome marking time in a place where the world outside had been reduced to fragments and rumors. John approached with a tray, carefully placing small portions of oatmeal and slices of bread in front of each woman. He spoke softly, explaining in measured English, repeating slowly so Lena could catch the meaning, the instructions about taking small bites, drinking water, resting when tired. His tone was steady, never commanding, never harsh, only attentive. Lena nodded slightly, her lips parting just enough to whisper a tentative, "Thank you," when his gaze met hers. She felt the warmth of acknowledgement, a recognition of presence that had been absent for months. Each bite she took was deliberate, slow, a conscious effort to reclaim some sense of control over her own body and its needs. The other women began to mirror her, tentative at first, then with more confidence, sensing the rhythm established by John's patience. The air in the barracks shifted imperceptibly, the tension that had gripped them all beginning to loosen as the simple acts of nourishment and consideration formed a bridge across language, across fear, across the residue of war. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the leaves along the perimeter fence, carrying the scent of dry grass and the distant river, subtle reminders of the larger world. John moved among them, his presence unobtrusive yet felt, his hands adjusting plates, offering water, checking that each woman was sitting comfortably, breathing steadily. There was no rush, no hurry, only the quiet insistence that they be treated as human beings, with dignity and care. Lena, feeling the heat lift slightly from her chest with each sip, looked around the room, noticing small smiles, fleeting glances of trust, gestures that had previously been absent. She began to understand that this space, this time, was not just about survival, but about recognition, about being seen and acknowledged. Each movement John made reinforced a subtle but profound sense of order and safety. The women were not ignored, not rushed, not treated as objects to be processed, but as individuals whose needs mattered. The room became a rhythm of motion and stillness, of bites taken, water sipped, eyes meeting, brief nods, quiet acknowledgement of presence. Lena felt the pulse of life returning, small but insistent, a steady thrum that contrasted with the fragile stillness of days past. She could sense the invisible walls of fear beginning to recede, replaced by a fragile curiosity, a willingness to engage with this small window of care and attention. The sunlight shifted across the floorboards as the hour passed, marking the slow, deliberate passage of time in a way that was almost cinematic, each moment weighted with significance. Lena's breathing had evened, her body responding to the nourishment, her mind slowly opening to the notion that perhaps the world could offer something gentle, even in the midst of dislocation and uncertainty. The quiet of the room was punctuated only by the soft rustle of hands, the occasional clink of a dish, the careful movement of a chair, each sound resonating with the unspoken message that these women mattered. John paused, hands on his hips, observing the small progression, the subtle increase in confidence, the tentative beginnings of trust forming in the lines of posture and the careful eye contact. Lena, feeling her muscles relax just slightly, sensed the enormity of what these small actions represented: acknowledgement, care, patience, and the reclamation of human dignity. Each gesture, each word carefully chosen, each moment allowed to unfold without haste contributed to an atmosphere that had no immediate drama but carried immense emotional weight, a testament to the power of quiet attentiveness and steady presence in restoring not only health, but a sense of humanity to those who had been suspended in the limbo of fear and deprivation. The room, the sunlight, the dust, the measured movements of John, and the tentative engagement of Lena and the other women coalesced into a single tableau of fragile, cautious, but growing trust, a narrative of kindness unfolding in real time, slow and deliberate, marking a new rhythm for the day, for their bodies, and for their perception of what care could mean within the walls of the barracks. The afternoon sun had climbed higher, spilling through the barred windows in golden streams that caught the dust in midair and cast shifting patterns across the worn wooden floor. Lena Fisher remained seated, the small meal she had taken earlier settling slowly in her stomach, a warmth she had almost forgotten spreading through her chest. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the chair, fingers brushing the worn fabric of her uniform, tracing its thin threads, as if feeling for something solid and real. John Carter moved among the women again, his movements unhurried but deliberate, ensuring each had water, checking their posture, encouraging small sips with quiet gestures rather than loud words. The air in the barracks carried the faint scent of baked bread and boiled oatmeal from the morning, mingling with the dry, sun-warmed wood and the subtle tang of metal from the scale and utensils. Outside, the breeze shifted slightly, stirring the dry leaves along the perimeter and bringing with it a faint hint of river water from a distance, a reminder that the world continued beyond these walls. Lena glanced at the other women, noticing subtle changes in their expressions, small easing of tension in shoulders and hands, the first hints of recognition that they were no longer entirely alone in their vulnerability. John approached with a clipboard, jotting down measurements, then paused to make eye contact with Lena, a gesture of reassurance that was almost imperceptible yet carried weight. He guided her slowly to a corner of the room with additional chairs and a small stack of blankets, allowing her to settle comfortably while he tended to the next in line. Lena's breathing had evened, and she could feel a tentative confidence returning to her steps and movements, a fragile understanding that she could trust the gestures and rhythm of this small human kindness. The sunlight shifted again, lengthening the shadows of the wooden beams, creating a soft lattice across the floor, a subtle reminder that time moved, that recovery was not instant but gradual, and that each moment of care mattered. She sipped water carefully, watching John as he measured the next woman, appreciating the steadiness and patience in his actions. The room was quiet except for the gentle clink of utensils and the soft shifting of bodies, a rhythm of presence and attention that seemed almost ceremonial. Lena felt her mind clear slightly, a thought emerging unbidden that perhaps the small acts of today would build a foundation for tomorrow, a rhythm of care and observation that transcended fear. John paused by a window, observing the play of light and shadow, then returned to check on Lena, ensuring her chair was comfortable, her posture supported, her hands relaxed. She followed his gaze briefly, noting the sunlight illuminating dust motes, the air thick yet alive, a tangible presence that seemed to echo the slow, deliberate unfolding of trust. Each movement John made reinforced an unspoken promise that they were seen, acknowledged, and protected within this small space, a promise carried not in words but in measured, attentive action. Lena adjusted slightly in her chair, breathing deeper, allowing the calm of the room to permeate her body, recognizing that the simple, steady presence of another human being could restore a sense of balance, a sense of safety, and a connection that she had not expected to feel in this place. The other women shifted as well, guided by the quiet cues of John's careful attentiveness, a subtle choreography of care forming in real time, reinforcing trust, patience, and the tentative emergence of hope. The sunlight continued its slow passage across the floor, marking the hours with a quiet consistency, each ray illuminating small, meaningful details, the glint of metal on a chair leg, the curve of a hand as it reaches for water, the careful, deliberate steps of a body regaining strength. Lena felt the slow pulse of life returning not just to her body, but to her perception of her surroundings, a growing awareness that she could exist here safely, that small gestures could carry immense emotional weight, and that the patient, steady presence of someone who cared could begin to reshape her understanding of what it meant to be human. She watched John finish with the last of the women, noting his subtle adjustments, his soft instructions, and the careful attention he gave to every detail, each motion reinforcing the quiet message that they were recognized, valued, and supported. The barracks seemed to breathe alongside them, a space transformed by deliberate care, by the attentive rhythm of small actions, and by the shared recognition of dignity restored, moment by moment, in real time. The late afternoon light slanted through the narrow windows, casting long, warm lines across the wooden floor of the barracks, illuminating the dust that danced lazily in the air like tiny golden spirits. Lena Fisher sat upright in the chair, feeling the residual warmth of the meal settling slowly through her body, each breath more measured, each heartbeat a gentle reminder of the nourishment that had begun to reach her veins. Her eyes traced the outlines of the room, the subtle textures of peeling paint, the scratches on the floorboards, the small imperfections that had become familiar landmarks in a space that felt increasingly like a place of observation and quiet care rather than confinement. John Carter moved with the same deliberate precision, glancing between the women as he made his rounds, clipboard in hand, offering words in careful, slow English that Lena could understand bit by bit. He guided her attention to small gestures, demonstrating the method of sitting comfortably, of taking slow, deliberate sips of water, of adjusting her posture so that each breath would come with less strain and more ease. The other women, initially tentative, began to follow these cues, subtle shifts of hands, quiet mirroring of movements, each one a silent acknowledgement that the routine of care could be trusted. Lena's focus drifted for a moment to the sunlight spilling across the floor, the long shadows stretching like soft bridges from one beam to the next, and she noted the faint creak of the floorboards as someone shifted, the soft clink of a dish, the subtle movement of air through the open windows carrying the scent of dry grass and distant river water. Each detail became part of a larger rhythm, the rhythm of a room where attention and patience had transformed the ordinary into something almost ceremonial, where small gestures held weight, where the simple act of being seen and acknowledged began to take root. John approached with another tray, quietly arranging small portions of bread and fruit, guiding each woman through the motions with calm, steady hands, never rushing, never pressing, only providing enough support to ensure comfort and understanding. Lena took another bite of the bread, feeling the texture, the warmth, the taste, and a small, almost imperceptible sense of normalcy began to unfurl within her. She noticed the other women beginning to relax, their shoulders easing, their eyes no longer darting anxiously, the tension in their hands softening as they engaged with the gentle cadence John had established. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint rustle of leaves, a reminder that the world continued beyond the walls, that life had a pace outside the confines of routine, and that these moments of attentiveness were an invitation to exist fully, even in a small, contained space. Lena felt her fingers unclench, the tension in her neck releasing, a subtle confidence building in her posture, as though each small act of care reinforced the understanding that she was no longer merely surviving, but beginning to inhabit her own space within it. John moved to a window, observing the angle of sunlight, then returned to adjust the placement of a chair for another woman, his movements precise yet gentle, a silent teaching of dignity and patience. Lena watched, absorbing the rhythm, recognizing the intent behind each gesture, the quiet insistence that each woman be treated as an individual deserving of respect and care. The afternoon progressed in this measured, deliberate manner, a sequence of small acts that carried cumulative weight, a tapestry of attention and patience weaving through the room. Each movement, each adjustment, each small instruction from John reinforced the sense of safety and recognition, the idea that humanity could be reclaimed one deliberate act at a time. Lena felt a warmth spread, not only in her body but in the recognition that these actions mattered, that presence and attentiveness were as sustaining as the food and water, that the steady, unhurried care offered by John Carter was reshaping the atmosphere, the room, and their perception of themselves. She allowed her gaze to linger on the floorboards, on the light shifting through the windows, on the careful movements of John, and recognized that this slow, attentive rhythm was creating a space in which they could begin to breathe, to trust, and to feel the quiet, steady pulse of restored human dignity. The sun had shifted closer to the horizon, its light now warmer, almost honeyed, spilling across the barracks and illuminating the worn textures of the wooden floorboards. Lena Fisher remained seated, the sensations of the meal and water lingering in her body, each breath more deliberate, each heartbeat measured, connecting her to the rhythm of the room. John Carter moved slowly between the chairs, his eyes attentive, noting every subtle shift in posture, every hesitant movement, every flicker of tension that might suggest discomfort or fatigue. He adjusted a blanket here, placed a small bowl within reach there, his gestures quiet yet deliberate, conveying an unspoken respect for the women in his care. The soft scrape of a chair across the floor, the faint rustle of clothing, the distant murmur of activity outside the barracks formed a delicate background rhythm that contrasted with the stillness inside. Lena's eyes wandered to the sunlight streaming through the windows, watching how the rays caught the fine dust in the air, each particle suspended momentarily, glimmering, before drifting down in slow arcs. She allowed herself to notice the subtle details around her, the chipped paint along the walls, the tiny scratches on the floor, the glint of metal on the handles of the small cabinets. Each observation became an anchor, a gentle tether to the present, to this space where care had been extended without expectation, without rush. John paused beside her, adjusting the chair slightly, guiding her hands to rest comfortably, speaking slowly, clearly, so that she could understand the cadence of his instructions. Lena followed his guidance, feeling the small shift in her body, the easing of tension in her shoulders and neck. Across the room, the other women were beginning to mirror her subtle movements, tentative gestures of self-care and attentiveness, each influenced by John's quiet leadership and consistent presence. The air was thick but not oppressive, carrying the faint scent of baked bread and morning oats, mingling with the dry warmth of the wooden floor and the subtle metallic tang of the room's fixtures. Lena felt her chest rise and fall with a steadiness she had not experienced in weeks, a pulse of calm threading through the remnants of anxiety and caution. Outside, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a bird, the shimmer of light on sun-warmed gravel reminded her that the world continued beyond these walls, a world in which care and patience could exist alongside hardship. John moved again, checking the placement of a water bottle for another woman, speaking softly as he guided her through measured sips, ensuring comfort, fostering trust through simple, consistent attention. Lena noticed the subtle interactions among the women, brief nods, quiet exchanges, the easing of defensive postures, all forming a delicate network of observation, understanding, and the first hints of shared confidence. She realized the room had shifted. It was no longer solely a place of waiting, of observation, or of restraint. It had become a space of measured rhythm, of deliberate care, where each gesture reinforced the sense that their needs were recognized, their presence respected. The sunlight moved across the floor, the shadows stretching and contracting in tandem with the slow progression of the afternoon. Lena's thoughts were quiet, allowing her to register the significance of these small acts, the profound weight carried in deliberate attentiveness, in the patience and constancy of someone who noticed without demand. Each breath, each sip of water, each small adjustment by John was a reaffirmation that they could exist with dignity, that subtle, patient care could create a foundation for trust, for awareness, for a return to themselves. The room breathed in rhythm with them, each movement and pause creating a silent narrative of attentiveness and reassurance, a testament to the quiet strength that could be conveyed through consistency, observation, and humanity. Lena felt the warmth of that quiet energy settle within her, an unspoken reassurance that these moments, small and deliberate, were shaping the possibilities of tomorrow, each one a step toward regaining not only physical strength, but the awareness that they were seen, valued, and acknowledged in the most fundamental ways. The shadows in the barracks grew longer as the afternoon continued, stretching across the floor and pooling in the corners where sunlight barely reached, softening the hard lines of the wooden walls and casting a golden hue on the worn floorboards. Lena Fisher adjusted slightly in her chair, feeling the subtle warmth from the sunlight mixing with the calming effect of the earlier meal, each breath slower, more even, the tension in her muscles uncoiling bit by bit. John Carter moved carefully among the women, his steps quiet but deliberate, pausing at each to observe posture, hand position, and facial expression, ensuring that the small adjustments he guided them through were absorbed without stress. The faint creak of the floorboards under his boots, the soft clatter of utensils from the earlier meal, and the distant murmur of voices beyond the wire fencing formed a gentle rhythm that underscored the quiet attentiveness permeating the room. Lena's eyes wandered, noticing the small details she had overlooked before, a slight warp in the floorboard beneath her chair, the subtle pattern of sunlight on the wall, a single feather caught on the edge of a windowsill. Each detail grounded her in the moment, providing a sense of stability that had been absent for so long. John approached with a tray of clean water bottles, setting them carefully within reach of the women, offering soft guidance on when and how to drink, speaking slowly, clearly, his voice steady and calm. Lena lifted the bottle to her lips, taking a careful sip, noticing the coolness of the water, the way it soothed her dry throat, the way the act of drinking, unhurried and deliberate, brought a small sense of agency back to her body. Across the room, the other women began to mimic these small gestures, tentative at first, then with growing confidence, the careful attention and steady presence of John providing a model for engagement and trust. Outside, the wind shifted slightly, brushing against the barracks and stirring the dry leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of river water and the distant aroma of summer grass, a reminder of the world beyond the walls, a world in which care and attentiveness could exist alongside routine and responsibility. Lena felt the subtle pulse of calm threading through her body, her chest rising and falling with a steadiness that had been absent for days, her hands relaxing on her lap as she absorbed the quiet rhythm of the room. John moved to the window, adjusting the blinds slightly to temper the light, then returned to guide another woman through a careful sip of water, his actions deliberate and precise, each gesture a silent teaching of dignity and patience. Lena observed the interactions, noticing how the women responded not only to his words, but to the subtleties of his movements, the gentle adjustments of chairs, the way he oriented the tray of provisions, the soft attentiveness that conveyed respect without fanfare. The air, still thick but comfortable, carried the mingled sense of clean water, sunlight-warmed wood, and the faint memory of the morning meal, each element grounding the women in a space of predictability and care. Lena's thoughts drifted lightly, reflecting on the sensation of being tended to in this quiet, consistent manner, recognizing that trust was being built through repetition, through careful, unhurried attention, through small gestures that spoke louder than words. She noticed the small exchanges among the other women, subtle nods, brief glances, the easing of defensive postures, each signaling a recognition that the atmosphere had shifted from one of apprehension to cautious engagement. The sunlight continued its slow progression, shifting the patterns on the floor, highlighting the minute details of the room and the deliberate movements of John, reinforcing the lesson that attentiveness, patience, and steady presence could transform the environment. Lena felt a growing sense of security, a quiet awareness that the meticulous care being extended to them was a foundation upon which they could begin to rebuild confidence, strength, and the ability to inhabit the space without constant tension. The room breathed with them, each measured step and gesture forming a rhythm of calm and trust, a slow unfolding of humanity and dignity. That, while subtle, carried profound significance for every woman present. Lena allowed herself to settle fully into this rhythm, noting the gentle coordination of movements, the attentiveness of John's eyes, the soft guidance of his hands, and the collective, tentative acceptance of care from the group, all coalescing into a sense of quiet stability and the first hints of confidence returning after weeks of uncertainty. The late afternoon light shifted gently, casting long, warm bands across the wooden floor of the barracks and highlighting the fine dust that hung in the air like tiny suspended sparks. Lena Fisher sat upright, hands resting lightly on her lap, noticing for the first time the subtle weight of her own body, the way her muscles responded to each breath, the small ache in her shoulders easing under the influence of nourishment and careful attention. John Carter moved among the women with deliberate care, his boots making soft, measured sounds on the floorboards as he checked water bottles, adjusted chairs, and offered instructions in slow, clear English. His voice carried a steady rhythm that seemed to settle into the room, a pulse that the women could align with, a quiet marker of consistency and attention. Lena's gaze followed him as he bent to guide another woman through the careful motion of drinking water, his hands never pressing, never hurried, only providing enough support for her to feel the subtle shift of weight, the easing of tension in her posture. Outside the windows, the breeze rustled dry leaves along the perimeter, a faint scent of summer grass and distant river water drifting in, reminding Lena that the world beyond these walls continued, a world where calm and attentiveness were possible. She felt the warmth of the late sun on her face, the gentle pressure of the chair beneath her, the subtle rhythm of her own breath syncing with the quiet motions around her. John paused for a moment near the window, adjusting the blinds to temper the light, then returned to guide Lena through the slow, deliberate act of standing, shifting weight from one leg to the other, teaching her how to move with balance and control after days of weakness. She followed his guidance, muscles remembering the actions even as her mind absorbed the quiet lesson of patience and care. The other women, inspired by this measured attention, began to mimic the subtle movements. Tentative at first, then with growing confidence, each small gesture reinforcing the sense of safety and recognition that John had cultivated. Lena felt the pulse of calm threading through her body, a quiet acknowledgement that her presence was seen, that her needs were noticed, and that the patient, attentive actions of another human being could restore a sense of balance and dignity. The room seemed to breathe along with them, each small movement, each deliberate act of care creating a tapestry of rhythm and trust. She noticed the interplay of shadows and sunlight stretching across the floorboards, the way the dust motes moved through the light, and the faint hum of the camp outside, each element adding texture and grounding her in the present. John moved back to the center of the room, checking supplies, adjusting the placement of chairs, and observing the subtle shifts in the women's posture and expressions, his attention a steady presence that reinforced the lesson that their well-being mattered. Lena's eyes lingered on his careful, deliberate actions, recognizing in each movement the quiet insistence that humanity could be maintained, that dignity could be upheld through small, attentive gestures. The soft murmur of the women, the gentle clink of utensils, the subtle rustle of clothing and shifting chairs, all formed a rhythm of quiet care, a sequence that Lena absorbed fully, feeling a renewed sense of agency and recognition. Each breath she took was deliberate, each small movement a conscious effort to align with the calm, measured pace John set, understanding that recovery was not only physical but also emotional, built moment by moment through consistent attentiveness. Outside, the sun continued its slow descent, bathing the room in a soft amber glow, casting long shadows that marked the passage of time while reinforcing the steady, deliberate pattern of care and trust unfolding inside. Lena felt the subtle power of this rhythm, a quiet but profound transformation that spoke of human dignity, patience, and the gentle reclamation of confidence, a testament to the effect of steady, attentive presence in restoring both body and spirit after long days of deprivation and uncertainty. The room, the sunlight, the faint sounds from outside, and John's deliberate movements coalesced into a single flow of quiet reassurance, a space in which Lena and the other women could begin to trust, to breathe, and to sense the slow return of self-assurance and human dignity. The golden light of late afternoon deepened, casting long, soft shadows across the wooden floorboards and illuminating the fine dust that drifted through the barracks like suspended specks of memory. Lena Fisher shifted slightly in her chair, feeling the subtle changes in her body from the meals and careful hydration of the past hours, a gentle warmth spreading from her core outward, easing tension she had carried for days. Her hands rested lightly on the edges of the chair, fingers tracing the worn wood, connecting her to the texture of the room and grounding her in the present. John Carter moved among the women with measured steps, checking water bottles, adjusting seating positions, offering quiet, deliberate instructions in slow, clear English, each word carefully chosen to ensure understanding and calm. He guided their hands and posture, demonstrating subtle adjustments to ease strain and maintain balance, movements so precise and attentive that the women began to mirror them instinctively. Lena observed the other women, noting their small, tentative changes, shoulders relaxing, fingers unclenching, eyes softening, the first hints of trust appearing in their expressions. Outside, the breeze stirred the dry leaves along the perimeter, carrying faint scents of summer grass and distant river water into the room, a reminder that the world continued beyond the walls, and that the rhythms of life could be gentle and consistent. Lena lifted a bottle of water once more, following John's instructions to drink slowly, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat, each swallow a deliberate reclamation of control over her own body. The other women followed suit, small movements synchronized in quiet coordination, creating an unspoken rhythm in the room that was both comforting and stabilizing. John moved carefully to a tray of provisions, placing small portions within reach, explaining the steps of consumption and rest with clarity and patience. Lena took in each gesture, noting the calm authority in his eyes, the subtle warmth of his attentiveness, the way he managed to maintain dignity for every woman present without the need for elevated voice or rushed instruction. The sunlight shifted again, the patterns of light and shadow dancing slowly across the floor, highlighting the movement of dust motes, the subtle glint of metal on utensils, the small, deliberate motions of chairs and blankets. Lena felt the quiet weight of presence settle around her, the rhythm of careful attention reinforcing the sense that she was recognized, her needs mattered, and she was supported in this space. Across the room, the women began to engage more fully with the gentle instructions, their bodies responding to the cues of care, the small, repeated gestures that John offered, the patient, unhurried attention creating a tapestry of trust. Lena could sense the room breathing in rhythm with their movements, a slow pulse of calm threading through each body in action, each shift in posture, each deliberate step in the small exercises John guided them through. Outside, the sun descended further, casting a soft amber glow that softened the edges of the room, drawing attention to subtle textures, small imperfections, and quiet details that Lena had begun to appreciate as markers of reality and stability. She felt her own breathing align with the measured pace, the calm rhythm John had established influencing her awareness, her posture, her focus. The women were no longer merely surviving the passage of time. They were beginning to inhabit the space fully, each moment marked by deliberate action, attentive observation, and the slow, steady reconstruction of a sense of safety and dignity. Lena allowed her attention to drift briefly to the sunlight, the dust, the careful movements of John and the other women, recognizing that the deliberate pace, the quiet attentiveness, and the subtle, persistent care were creating a new reality for them all, one where trust could emerge, confidence could rebuild, and humanity could assert itself quietly but unmistakably. The room, infused with sunlight, careful action, and patient attention, carried a sense of steady reassurance, a rhythm of presence and observation that affirmed to each woman that they were seen, acknowledged, and respected in every small, deliberate moment. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, spilling a deeper golden hue into the barracks, the beams of light catching the drifting dust and casting intricate patterns across the worn wooden floor. Lena Fisher felt a subtle shift within herself, a quiet sense of steadiness threading through her chest as her muscles responded more naturally to each breath, each small movement. She watched John Carter move among the women, his motions deliberate yet fluid, clipboard in hand, eyes attentive to every subtle cue. The way his shoulders shifted, the gentle curling of fingers, the smallest sigh that spoke of comfort or strain. Each gesture of his was a silent instruction. In presence and care, an example of patience translated into motion. The women, sensing the calm rhythm, began to adjust themselves in subtle ways, shifting their weight, lifting water bottles to sip slowly, moving their hands to rest on laps or chairs in response to John's guidance. Each movement a reinforcement of the quiet trust he had established. Lena's gaze drifted around the room, noting small details she had not observed before. The soft warp of the floorboards beneath her chair, the subtle grain of the wooden walls, the glint of sunlight on a metal handle, the way the shadows elongated and shifted across surfaces as the sun lowered. Each observation anchored her further in the present, a tether to stability and attentiveness. John paused, watching Lena and the other women, ensuring that each understood the subtle cues, that each had the space to act with control and comfort, guiding them without force, without rush. Lena followed his directions carefully, her body responding to the precise adjustments he suggested, her posture lengthening, her chest opening slightly, her shoulders easing. Across the room, other women mirrored the small movements, their attention drawn to the subtle model he provided, the rhythm of deliberate, attentive action. Outside, the summer breeze rustled leaves along the perimeter, carrying the faint scent of river water, a reminder of the world beyond the barracks and of the possibility of calm, steady care existing alongside routine and responsibility. Lena took another sip of water, noticing the coolness and relief it brought, the way the act connected her to the deliberate pace John had set. She began to sense the subtle network of trust forming in the room, small gestures accumulating into a quiet, shared understanding that they were acknowledged and their presence mattered. The sunlight continued to shift, long shadows tracing across the floor, accentuating the textures, the edges of furniture, the slight imperfections in the walls, all of which Lena absorbed with a growing sense of awareness and stability. John adjusted a chair for another woman, guiding her slowly into position, his hands steady, movements unhurried, demonstrating that careful attention could communicate respect, patience, and human dignity. Lena noticed how the women were beginning to anticipate these small gestures, following the rhythm of care, responding with subtle nods, quiet acknowledgement, and mirrored movements, forming an unspoken dialogue of trust. The air in the room, still thick with warmth, carried the faint mingled sense of sunlight, dry wood, and remnants of earlier meals, creating a space that felt simultaneously contained and expansive, a world where attentiveness had transformed the ordinary into something meaningful. Lena felt a deepening awareness of her own body, her own movements, as each gesture reinforced the message that she was seen, respected, and valued. The room, with its interplay of light, shadow, sound, and careful movement, had become a quiet sanctuary, a space where humanity could quietly reassert itself, where dignity was restored in measured steps, and where the women could begin to inhabit the barracks fully, aware of themselves, their bodies, and the attentive presence of another who understood the weight and importance of deliberate, patient care. The late afternoon had deepened into a soft, warm glow that filled the barracks, the sunlight filtering through the windows and painting long, slender shadows across the wooden floor. Lena Fisher sat with her hands resting gently in her lap, feeling the subtle strength returning to her body, the warmth of the food and water spreading through her, settling her muscles, and bringing a sense of equilibrium that she had not experienced in days. John Carter moved slowly among the women, checking their posture, observing the small adjustments they made in response to his guidance, and offering quiet, precise instructions in clear, careful English. Each gesture, each motion, was deliberate, unhurried, and designed to communicate attention and respect without imposing authority. Lena watched him, noting the steadiness of his hands, the measured calm of his eyes, the way he navigated the space, attending to each person with care and attentiveness. She shifted slightly, following his guidance, feeling her balance improve, her shoulders relax, and her breathing lengthen and smooth. The other women began to mirror these small adjustments, tentative at first, then with increasing confidence, each subtle movement reinforcing the rhythm of trust and attentiveness that John had established. Outside, the breeze stirred the leaves along the perimeter, carrying faint hints of river water and the dry summer grass, reminding Lena of the world beyond the walls and the continuity of life beyond the barracks. The room itself seemed to breathe with them, each measured motion, each deliberate gesture contributing to a growing sense of stability, of presence, and of acknowledgement. Lena lifted the water bottle again, drinking slowly, savoring the cool relief it brought to her throat, and feeling the gentle pulse of nourishment moving through her body. The other women followed, synchronized not by instruction but by the quiet modeling of John's attentive pace, each sip and subtle movement reinforcing a shared understanding of safety and trust. John moved to a tray of provisions, adjusting the placement of each item carefully, ensuring accessibility and comfort, his hands steady, his voice low, and even as he explained the steps for hydration and rest, emphasizing patience and deliberate action. Lena observed the small changes in the room, the easing of tension in the women's hands, the softening of eyes, the subtle exchange of glances that conveyed tentative reassurance. She noticed the sunlight shifting across the floorboards, highlighting the textures of the room, the fine scratches, the edges of furniture, and the long shadows that stretched and contracted with the movement of the sun. Each observation anchored her further in the moment, giving her a sense of presence, of participation, and of control over her own actions. John continued his careful circulation, checking each woman in turn, offering gentle guidance, adjusting positions, and reinforcing a slow, steady rhythm that allowed the women to regain a sense of autonomy and stability. Lena felt herself responding naturally, her movements more fluid, her posture straighter, her mind quieter as she absorbed the pattern of care and the deliberate pacing of John's actions. The room, suffused with sunlight, attentive presence, and subtle motion, had become a space of quiet reinforcement, where dignity, patience, and recognition were expressed through deliberate acts rather than words. Lena felt the gentle consolidation of trust and confidence forming within her, a quiet but profound sense that she could exist here safely, be observed without judgment, and reclaim small measures of control and self-assurance. The interplay of light, shadow, sound, and careful movement reinforced this rhythm, the room itself becoming a witness to the patient accumulation of care, and Lena allowed herself to settle fully into the quiet flow, sensing the importance of each deliberate action and understanding that the gradual, steady attention of another human being could restore not only physical composure, but a fundamental sense of human dignity and self-recognition. The sun was sinking lower, casting a softer, amber glow through the tall, narrow windows of the barracks, and the long shadows stretched across the worn wooden floor, reaching toward corners where light had barely touched before. Lena Fisher sat upright, her hands resting loosely on her lap, feeling the gentle warmth from the food and water that had moved steadily through her system, easing her muscles and bringing a sense of measured calm. Her gaze shifted across the room, noting the subtle movements of the other women, the way their posture had begun to ease, the faint, almost imperceptible softening of their expressions, the way they followed the rhythm John Carter had established with careful, deliberate guidance. John moved quietly among them, checking water bottles, adjusting the placement of chairs, giving slow, clear instructions in English that Lena could now understand more fully, each word deliberate, each gesture precise. His movements were purposeful yet unhurried, attending to the smallest details, the tilt of a chair, the angle of a wrist, the placement of a blanket, the way a foot rested on the floor. Lena adjusted herself according to his guidance, her body responding naturally, her chest opening slightly, her shoulders relaxing, her muscles remembering what it meant to move without strain. The other women began to mirror these movements, a delicate choreography of attention and trust forming quietly in the room, a pattern that required no words beyond the gentle guidance of John's presence. Outside, a warm breeze shifted, stirring the dry leaves along the perimeter and carrying faint scents of river water and sun-warmed grass, a reminder that the world beyond the barracks existed, that life outside could be calm and attentive, and that the rhythm established within these walls could extend beyond this immediate space. Lena took a slow sip of water, noticing the cooling relief in her throat, the small but steady sense of agency returning to her hands and arms, the way her body responded to the deliberate pacing of care. Each gesture John made, each small adjustment, reinforced the understanding that she was being seen, acknowledged, and respected, that her presence mattered, and that the careful, consistent attentiveness of another human being could restore a sense of equilibrium and dignity. The sunlight shifted again, lengthening shadows, illuminating the textures of the walls, the worn patterns on the floor, the subtle glints of metal on trays and utensils. Lena absorbed these details with a new attentiveness, feeling grounded and steady, recognizing that the room, with its quiet movements and deliberate gestures, had become a space of measured care, where every action contributed to the collective rhythm of reassurance. John moved to a corner of the room to adjust a blanket for another woman, his movements calm and deliberate, his eyes scanning for any subtle signal of discomfort, his hands precise, demonstrating care and patience without force. Lena noticed the increasing ease in the women around her, the slight nods, the soft breaths, the subtle alignment of posture, all forming an unspoken network of mutual understanding and trust, cultivated by the patient attentiveness that had pervaded the room. The air was warm, filled with faint scents of wood, sunlight, and the remnants of the earlier meal, carrying a sense of continuity and stability. Lena's thoughts were calm, reflective. She felt the pulse of life return steadily to her body, a quiet awareness that the patient rhythm of care offered by John was reshaping their sense of space, of self, and of collective trust. Each movement, each small adjustment, each deliberate gesture contributed to a growing confidence, a recognition that she and the other women could inhabit this room safely, attend to their own needs, and respond with subtle, deliberate engagement. The interplay of sunlight, shadow, careful motion, and attentive presence created a rhythm that infused the room with calm, patience, and dignity, and Lena allowed herself to settle fully into this flow, absorbing the quiet lesson of humanity expressed through deliberate, consistent, and thoughtful action, understanding that the slow accumulation of care was restoring not only the body but a profound sense of self-worth and trust in those around her. The evening sun had dipped lower, filtering through the narrow windows and filling the barracks with a soft, golden glow that stretched across the worn wooden floors and brushed against the walls in gentle patterns. Lena Fisher sat quietly in her chair, feeling the subtle residual warmth of nourishment and hydration settling into her body, each breath flowing more evenly, each muscle responding with a quiet steadiness she had not known earlier in the day. Her eyes traced the lines of the room, noting the interplay of light and shadow, the fine scratches and marks on the floorboards, the faint shimmer of dust motes suspended in the sunbeams. And for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe fully into the space around her. John Carter moved with calm precision among the women, his steps measured, clipboard in hand, observing and guiding, with careful attention to posture, hand placement, and subtle facial cues. Each gesture, each motion, was deliberate, quiet, and imbued with attentiveness, demonstrating care through action rather than words. Lena adjusted slightly, following his guidance, feeling her shoulders release tension, her chest expand, her movements growing more fluid as her body remembered the sensation of support and careful observation. The other women mirrored these small adjustments, tentative at first, then with growing confidence, forming an unspoken rhythm in the room, a pattern of trust and attentiveness reinforced through quiet observation. Outside, the breeze carried the faint scent of dry grass and distant river water into the room, a reminder that the world beyond these walls persisted, that calm and attentiveness could exist alongside routine and responsibility. Lena lifted a water bottle and drank slowly, noticing the soothing coolness and the way the deliberate pace of her actions, matched with John's steady guidance, began to knit a quiet sense of agency and trust into her body and mind. The sunlight shifted again, elongating shadows, highlighting subtle textures on the walls, the edges of chairs, the fine glint of metal on utensils, each detail grounding her further in the present moment. John moved among the women, offering small adjustments, guiding posture, providing silent instruction through the rhythm of his motions, ensuring that each woman had space to experience comfort and support. Lena noted the increasing ease in their bodies, the softening of tense hands, the relaxation of shoulders, the gentle nods of recognition and trust, forming a network of understanding without words. The air was warm, imbued with the faint scent of sunlight, wood, and remnants of earlier meals, creating an environment that felt contained yet expansive, a space where attentiveness and patience could cultivate security and reassurance. Lena felt the quiet reinforcement of her own presence, the subtle strengthening of confidence and dignity, a recognition that each deliberate act of care built a foundation for trust and stability. The women continued to follow the rhythm set by John, their subtle, synchronized movements a testament to the slow, persistent influence of consistent, attentive guidance. The interplay of light, shadow, careful motion, and patient presence wove a quiet, reassuring tapestry that filled the room, transforming it into a space where human dignity, attentiveness, and calm could thrive. Lena allowed herself to absorb the full weight of the atmosphere, sensing the gentle consolidation of trust, patience, and recognition that surrounded her, and she felt the beginnings of a deep, quiet confidence that the measured, deliberate care she and the others were receiving could restore not only their bodies but their sense of self and their awareness of human kindness. Each movement, each gesture, each breath taken in this space reinforced the understanding that they were seen, valued, and treated with attention and respect, and Lena settled fully into the rhythm, absorbing the quiet, steady presence that affirmed her dignity and the possibility of trust renewed. The sun had fully set beyond the horizon, leaving the barracks bathed in a soft, fading amber that slowly surrendered to the dim, cool blue of early evening. Lena Fisher sat upright in her chair, the residual warmth from her earlier nourishment grounding her body, the steady rhythm of her breath now calm and even. Her fingers rested lightly on her lap as she observed the room, the quiet movements of the other women, the soft settling of blankets and chairs, the subtle rustle of clothing, and the delicate interplay of shadows cast by the last rays of sunlight. John Carter moved deliberately among them, his presence calm, assured, and attentive, each step measured, each gesture precise, ensuring that every woman was comfortable, their posture supported, their breathing steady, their small actions aligned with the rhythm of care he had cultivated. The faint hum of the camp beyond the barracks reached their ears, distant and muted, mingling with the soft creaks of floorboards and the occasional clink of utensils or water bottles, forming a subtle, consistent soundscape of life and attention. Lena lifted a small cloth to dab her fingers, noticing the texture of the fabric, the coolness against her skin, and how each small motion felt deliberate, connected, and meaningful within this space of attentiveness. John paused near the window, adjusting the blinds slightly to temper the final light, then returned to guide another woman through careful, controlled movements, his hands steady, voice low and even, offering instructions that were clear and deliberate, fostering both understanding and a sense of calm autonomy. Lena observed these interactions, feeling a sense of unity growing within the room, the women learning to respond not only to his words but to the subtle cues of motion, posture, and timing, the silent communication of attentiveness teaching them to move with care and awareness. The evening air seeped in through a slightly open window, carrying the faint scent of river water, summer grass, and warm earth, reminding Lena that the world outside persisted, expansive and patient, mirroring the gentle, measured atmosphere John had created inside. She felt the steady pulse of life returning to her muscles, a sense of grounded awareness threading through each breath, each subtle shift in posture, each careful movement she mirrored from the guidance given. The sunlight waned further, leaving shadows that stretched softly across the floor, accentuating the textures of walls, floorboards, and furniture, each detail inviting observation and quiet reflection. John continued his careful, deliberate work, ensuring that each woman had space, comfort, and the subtle reassurance of presence, his gestures reinforcing the slow, steady rhythm of care that now defined the atmosphere. Lena recognized the gradual transformation, the slow accumulation of trust, attention, and calm, each act reinforcing the understanding that she and the other women were seen, acknowledged, and respected. The quiet interplay of light, shadow, movement, and attention wove a subtle, comforting tapestry through the room, a testament to the power of steady, deliberate care to restore a sense of dignity, confidence, and awareness. Lena allowed herself to breathe fully into this rhythm, noting the small, deliberate motions, the careful attention, the soft exchanges of trust, and the growing confidence that they could inhabit this space safely, fully, and with acknowledgement. Each subtle gesture, each measured act, each attentive observation contributed to a profound, almost imperceptible restoration of human dignity, leaving Lena with a quiet awareness that the patient, deliberate, and consistent presence of care had reshaped not only their bodies but their perception of themselves. And for the first time in many days, she felt a slow, steady, and certain connection to both the space and the quiet humanity that had returned to it.